What kind of artist are you? This question, although only slightly different than the usual, "Oh, you're an artist, what kind of art do you make?" is subtly more nuanced. Inherent within this question is the idea that artists are not a monolith, that we as a breed of human are varied, each driven by distinct desires and goals. To any artist, this is obvious. We know instinctively that we are not all the same, and yet we share in some manner of kinship with those around us who have some innate need or desire to create. In this episode, I am exploring three subtypes of artist, primarily focusing on what drives each of them. I think in the future, taking a look at the difference between artists who are driven by an innate need to create, or even the separation between art, skill, and craft might be appropriate. So please let me know if you would like to hear about those as well. To begin, the three types I would like to talk about today are these: artists driven toward a profession in the arts, artists driven by a desire to progress and grow, and artists who pursue art for the joy alone. Before we dive in, however, let me take a moment and explain why I think this is beneficial. As artists, we tend to understand our own unique perspectives, even if we haven't spent much time dwelling on them. We know what drives us. We know why we continue to stay up late, why we stay home instead of spending time seeking easy entertainment, and why we risk failure constantly. This understanding creates opportunities for camaraderie, for finding others who strive for the same goals. However, if you, driven forward by a hunger to progress at all costs with your skill, are to meet another who pursues joy alone in their work, well, what you share in artistic experience is likely to equate to what you do not share. While you constantly put time into things which are not enjoyable but contain enrichment for your forward progress, they might shy away from the difficult or unpleasant, content to let their skill grow slowly over long periods of time. These distinctions, understanding them and understanding yourself first and foremost, can aid you in your introspection. The understanding can make it easier for you to explain to others why you do what you do, justifying it if need be, or simply reassuring yourself in most cases. Lastly, for those who are not artists in your world, understanding the differentiating factors between yourself, other artists, and non-artists alike can help you avoid awkward or frustrating conversations. In this episode, I am exploring only three categories, not insisting there are only three. It is also very possible that many of you listening fit into more than one of these categories, though I would assume most fit more squarely into one particular arena. So let's take a look at each in detail, starting with artists driven by profession. This first category likely feels as if it needs little introduction. Artists of this kind are driven by a desire to make, to create, and to have that be their livelihood, in part or in whole. While I think many of us might leap at this notion, I would caution you to look inward before you wholeheartedly attribute this category to yourself. While artists that are driven toward making art their career obviously care about the art they produce and the vision behind it, those features often take a backseat for the commercial viability of a thing. I am not asserting that this manner of artist is soulless, of course, or that they have forfeited their artistic integrity as some might insist, but they have a more delicate balance within their psyche. This artist makes decisions based on what is financially viable and reasonable. They are likely to change the kinds of paint they use in subtle ways in order to make their art more desirable. They are apt to research a company before applying, make sure many of their portfolio pieces reflect what that company desires, and other things along these lines. You will often hear this talked about in particular communities with people deciding to paint in oil instead of acrylic, because oil seems to sell better. Or if you live in a place like Colorado, where I come from, then it makes sense to paint the aspens and all these beautiful mountain scenes, because those things are associated with this region. They're more commercially viable here from a lot of people's analysis. This manner of artist is committed to making art their career, and is willing to make sacrifices to get there. There is nobility in this pursuit. This is, if absolutely nothing else, practical. When applying for a job, you seldom get to do only what you want. Employment is an agreement between you and the person paying you. They want you to complete a task, and you want to be paid to complete said task. The employer is able to vary how much they pay, and you as the artist are able to vary which tasks you take on. If you seek only a limited niche, you limit the amount of options available to you. Whereas, if you are willing to take on things just outside your comfort or desired zone, you will have far more opportunities available to you. So, some of the benefits of this particular category are quite remarkable. First of all, decision making can often become far easier for these manner of artists. When practicing or working on an artwork, the question is less what do I want to do and more of a what should I be doing? While this seems perhaps odd, many artists struggle with knowing what to paint or draw. If you are driven toward a career, it's often much easier to hone in on what skills you should develop and the kinds of pieces that you should be developing to put into your portfolio. For me, this is likely to be one of the greatest benefits. I have too many things that I want to do all the time, and deciding between the 17 different artistic things I want to pursue is quite daunting. When I am able to look at the work I am doing and have something, anything to help me cut through the fog, I find that incredibly helpful. There is a sense of focus to an artist driven toward a career. Often you are able to find someone who does what you want to do, and with the magnificent and terrible power of the internet, find out how they got to their current position. You can tailor your portfolio toward that manner of work. Find what kinds of teachers and classes they had in the past, sometimes even purchase resources from them. In this day and age, there are so many different ways to pursue such things, and that sense of focus is a tremendous boon. In fact, for me, in my life, most of the artists that I've seen that have actually gone forward and developed functional art careers, where they've taken care of a large chunk of their annual earnings through their artwork, have been these kinds of artists. People who have been very, very dedicated to pursuing what is going to allow them to stay in it longer. There is a lot of talk and conversation in higher, kind of esoteric artistic fields about how this is soulless, about how this kind of art pursuit is missing out on what art really is, that it's only really art in a true sense if you're doing what you want to do, if you're pursuing esoteric and philosophical things. And I think that narrow manner of thinking about art is always going to be detrimental. The reality is, if you as a human are comfortable with not always doing exactly what you would like to be doing artistically, but getting to make art 30, 40, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and you find joy in that, you find success, you find fulfillment, then I see nothing wrong with it. However, there are some struggles that come with this manner of artistic pursuit, like hope. You have to continue to strain yourself moving ever forward, and in order to do that, you have to rely on hope, on the belief that you can move forward, that you can obtain the goal that you're reaching for. The other two categories of artists struggle less with this notion, though I think some amount of hope seems inherently necessary for artists. If this is you, if you are pushing yourself ever forward toward an art career, you must continue to hope, and you must find ways to bolster yourself against despair. Finances are another consideration, and not just in the way that you might think. Obviously, money is needed in order to, well, live. If you are looking to support yourself as an artist, you might need a clear understanding of what that means, an understanding of how much you actually need to live on, and what you are willing to do without to reduce that amount of money to something that's much more manageable. Rafi and Klee talk about these things a lot on their channel, and I would direct you there for some more specific insight. They are a lovely group of artists, and I appreciate that they speak frequently about what life is actually like for a normal artist. The good, the bad, the ugly. They also have a lovely demeanor, and there's just a sense of authenticity to them that makes everything they produce delightful. It can also be difficult for artists to value their time and effort in a fiscal way, though. If you are pushing toward an art career, you will likely need to be better at this, or you'll be forced to learn how to be better at it in order to make ends meet. Artists struggle to understand that their work is valuable, that their time is valuable, and there's a lot of artists who have a tendency to undersell themselves, to list their pieces of artwork or their hourly rates as things that they find reasonable, when in reality, the skills that you possess as an artist are fairly unique and take a long time to develop. Though I do not share the sentiment about this manner of artistic pursuit being soulless or devoid of dream and emotion, I think it's good to touch on it for at least a moment. Some people in the art community think pursuing a career getting paid for your craft is soulless, that you are selling out as an artist and have lost your way in some capacity. This could not be further from the truth. Are there artists who do this, who pursue money only and are willing to do anything to make a dollar? Of course. But to put all artists who diligently pursue a career in art into the same box is simply disrespectful. Like I said, I think this notion is foolish, but there is a real chance you might struggle with these feelings. Struggle with the idea that you are no longer a real artist because you don't make only the things you want to. You make things for other people. You know what, though? Art is for people, for you, and for the people you produce it for. There is not that big a difference in producing a commission for someone who sought you out, loved your style, and wanted you to make something for them, than you simply making what you want to in your basement. In fact, I would argue that art becomes the best version of itself when it is made with more than one human mind. It is a beautiful and intricate relationship that we share with art as humans, so be careful in taking in these manners of notions. The next category of artist I'd like to talk about is those who pursue progress above nearly everything else. These can be the artists who are working on their books, their large projects, a mural, a comic. It can take many forms. Sometimes it is just the person who works on the same subject all the time, striving to improve, to hone their skills in a particular area. In fact, if I were to subdivide this group, it would be broken simply: those who work on eternal projects and those who work on eternal practice. Neither of these pursuits are, in and of themselves, bad. Though, like most things, I think some introspection and self-analysis is always a good thing. I believe I fit into this particular category. The idea of working on art for a career is tantalizing. And if you are willing to say that teaching art counts, then I suppose I have already done it. But risking everything to make it as a painter or illustrator right now in my life would be intensely risky. And I'm just not that big a risk taker. If I were younger, sure, and actually that is the plan once my daughter is a little older and I have some time and the ability to focus on it more directly. But for now, and for most of my life, I fit firmly in this category, working eternally on practicing or working eternally on my projects. This category has some pretty substantial benefits and strengths to it, however. Chief among them, perhaps, is the fact that you always have something to work on, and there's little need to sit around and think about it. If you are, like me, focused on projects, I'm working on writing my second book right now. I'm working on building illustrations like the one in the background here for a children's book, and I'm just working on honing my skills towards those kinds of ends. I have an hour of free time. I know exactly how I can spend it. On the other hand, there are certain things that I practice, like my dragons and my robots and things along those lines. And again, if I sit down to draw and don't know immediately what I want to do, I don't have to go very far to find a category to dive into. And there's a lot of peace in that. And this is the case for a lot of artists in this category, that you don't need a lot of extra time to think about what you want to work on. Either you go back to practicing the same thing that you always do, the thing that makes you happy, that brings you joy, that you continue to develop your skills on, or you go back to your giant project. And sometimes it's not as simple as you go back to drawing a new page on your comic, but sometimes it's, well, the next panel I'm going to do is a 2-page spread, and I'm going to need to focus on composition, so I'm going to go practice composition for a while. If you are project-oriented, which is often associated with this category of progress, then it can make your life a lot easier when it comes to making decisions about what you want to do and how you ought to spend your time as an artist. It's easier to explain what you were doing when people ask as well. This is something that is not a big deal for some of us, but I keep mentioning it because there are a lot of artists in my life, a lot of the students that I taught over the years, that feel very self-conscious about the time that they put into their hobbies. Routinely, it's family and loved ones who have such negative comments or unfair critiques about how these people are spending their time. And if you are able to really quickly delineate what you're doing and why and what your focus is, often that's enough to dismantle someone's argument or critique. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes people are just jerks. But a lot of the time, they're more genuinely curious than they are critical. And their comments just simply come across in a critical fashion because they don't understand what drives us. They don't understand why we're doing what we are doing. But critical comments do come. I field them probably a couple times a month from somebody in my life Not one person in particular necessarily, but just from people in my life who were like, well, why are you drawing robots? Why are you working on these things? Why are you making videos? And it's easier if I'm able to, in that moment, have an explanation just to respond to them. I don't need to. I don't owe people that kind of response, and you don't either. But there is something for many of us that makes us feel a little bit more comfortable when we have a quick response. Almost just that in that moment, we feel like we are justified in our decisions and in the process that we're going through, even if we don't really need to justify ourselves to these other people. Often, sticking to a single thing for a long time can help you develop skills. So even if you are just addicted to working on a particular project, your comic, your manga, your animation, whatever, and that pursuit is what you're working on, because you're delving into it and you're excited about it frequently, you're going to develop your skills. And this is something that makes it easier to keep working. One of the downsides, I think, for all three of these categories, and maybe, just it's about being an artist in general, is that it's really easy to look back on your work for the last 6 months or a year and feel like you've made no progress. I know not every artist feels as if they need to make progress, but I feel like the vast majority of us do, or at least we go through seasons where it's important to us. And so I think it behooves us as artists to always be focusing on something and improving constantly, because it allows us to fight that nagging voice in the back of our head. And it's also just satisfying when you get to the end of a year or the end of a large project or the end of a semester, and you can look back on your work and go, man, I really did get better during this period. These kinds of artists are often also very good at collaborating because they're focused on what they're working on. So if this is you, it might be a good idea for you to try to track some other people down who work on similar things. Even if you're not going to work on the same project together, having the ability to work alongside someone else, to run ideas by them, is a really advantageous thing. And these artists are often really good at that. They often take breaks from their own work to invest some time in someone else's, and it inspires them, and they jump back into their own work with a new and renewed sense of vigor. So collaboration and community, working together with other artists, is a really beneficial thing. It's much harder to do nowadays than it used to be, but it is a really beneficial thing to hone in on and to think about as you move forward, especially as you get into adulthood. In that same train of thought, we have a Discord server attached to this channel, and if you'd like to check it out, it is linked below. It's primarily focused on giving artists just a small community to work with. We do things like Inktober or Smogus together, along with some other challenges, but they're not really serious. They're just a pursuit that we are taking on alongside some of our artistic brethren, and that community is really important. Lastly, on our strengths, not that this is the end of the strengths, but just the last one I'm going to focus on today, is the fact that it can be easier to push yourself forward, to just force yourself to continue working if this is the kind of artist you are. Because you know in the back of your mind what you want to do, the projects that need to be finished, the skills that need to be developed. It's much easier to, in that hour of free time you have in the evening, to go, well, I got to get back into this. It's important. I've dedicated a lot of time. I try to dedicate a little time every single day. It becomes much easier to force yourself into that work. Now, I know forcing yourself might sound like a negative thing, and there's probably some of you who belong to the third category of artists who bristle when you hear that. But to be honest, I force myself to do artwork a lot. And I force myself to do artwork because the ends justify the means. The things that I want to accomplish, that I want to be able to do, the things that I want to improve at, require hard work. They require dedication, and it's not always fun. I've been working a lot on trying to recontextualize that time in my mind so that I see everything that I can see as positive in a good light. But my nature doesn't really go that way. I have to remind myself of those things constantly because I'm pretty pessimistic by nature. But I am able to force myself into the work far more frequently because this is the kind of artist I am. Because I want to have the book finished. So I put a little bit of time into it every single day, even when I don't feel like it. And, lately there's been a lot of times where I haven't particularly felt like getting into it each evening when I finally put my daughter to bed and I have about an hour of free time. It's like, I'd really like to go play some video games now, but no, I'm going to go sit and write for an hour and try to get something done on that. That pursuit is extremely satisfying, especially when you reach the end. When I finished my first book, it was an incredible feeling of, oh my goodness, like I've accomplished this thing that I've wanted to do since I was 12. I finally sat down and did it. Is it good? Probably not. Probably need a lot of editing, but it's like a painting. Writing is a lot like painting. Once it's down, it can be modified and edited, and there's nothing to edit until you get it down in the first place. There are also some natural struggles that come with being this kind of artist, though, too. And the first of which actually kind of lines up with some of the things we just talked about, and that's the fact that it can feel like you're treading water. If you are eternally focused on a task or on improving a skill, it can feel like you haven't moved at all, like nothing has really been accomplished. And this is really difficult. If you're working on a comic, for example, maybe it's going to be 80 pages long and you're learning new skills as you move through it, it can be really disheartening if after 6 months you've gotten 12 pages done. And that's really difficult to keep going. The reality is progress is happening, but it doesn't feel like progress is happening fast enough for you to notice it. This is something that I have run into recently on the illustrations like you're watching take place in the background, the works that need to happen for the children's book. Because about half of the ones that I've worked on for Inktober and otherwise, I've gotten halfway through the project and gone, oh, it's not up to the caliber that I want it to be, so I'm going to have to do another version of it. And that feels like then, oh goodness, well, nothing was accomplished. That's not true. In almost all cases, there's a completed piece that is done, a piece that is either just something I can hold as a badge, something that could be made as a print, it can be made as a video, like there's economic value to it, but it's also the satisfaction of having done the thing, having finished the thing. That feeling can be very powerful, even when it's not particularly true, but it's something that you have to be aware of. If you only practice, it's easy to look back with regret at not actually dedicating yourself to something. This has been me for substantial portions of my artistic pursuits, where I thought that I just needed to practice enough and then I would have the skills that I wanted, and that's just not really how it works. Yes, skills need to be developed. You need to finish certain things in order to proceed, in order to do the things that you want to do. But if you only ever practice, you're not actually touching all of the things that you need to be developing. This is kind of like if you are training for a sport, like playing basketball or soccer, and instead of actually playing the game, you are just working out. You're running, you're lifting weights, you're exercising, but those skills are all disassociated from the actual skill of playing the game. If you want to draw a comic that has lots of figures in it and you're just obsessively practicing figure drawing and not actually trying to put things into compositions and have those characters interacting with one another or even developing characters in the first place, you're not actually developing the skills, at least not all of them, that are necessary for your pursuit. So I would encourage you, if this is you, if you're the kind of person that just obsessively practices, take a step back, because it would be wise for you to actually do the thing that you want to do instead of just practicing and assuming that it's all going to come together and you're going to magically be able to do the thing that you want to do someday. Sometimes you end up here because the career option was scary. This happens to a lot of artists, I think, where you go with an easier pursuit, something that you perceive as being easier because the alternative is scary. Maybe you really wanted to work on an art career, but you feel like your skills aren't up to the task yet, and so you're just eternally practicing and working on your own projects. Now, there is a place where this is 100% acceptable, and there's a place where you are dodging what your real dream is in lieu of something that's less stressful. This is something that I can't give you a ton of advice on as far as what you should do. The only thing I can tell you is to be introspective, to take a look at yourself. If you really, when you analyze your own desires and dreams, decide that you really wanted to be a professional artist, you still do, but you have shied away from that because it's difficult, because you're scared. If you think that that is going to leave you with a sense of regret when you get older, then it's something you really ought to look at. There's nothing wrong with choosing not to pursue an art career, even if at one point it was the only thing you wanted with your life. But if you sit there and go, I'm going to regret this. I'm going to regret that in my 20s or my early 30s, I didn't pursue this. Even if I fail, I want to know that I tried. So analyze yourself, look inside yourself, and try to figure out what that is. I'm not obviously saying that you should run away from your responsibilities and quit your well paying day job, but you should definitely understand yourself and think about how you're going to look back on this period when you get older and then make decisions based on that. It's easy also to just feel like you have a lack of purpose when it comes to your art. In the same way that sometimes this kind of artist has an easier time forcing themselves to do the work, sometimes you can force yourself so long that you forget why you're actually doing it in the first place. That's part of the reason why the project side is going to be a little bit easier on your heart and mind rather than just the eternal practicing side. So I would just encourage you that if you start feeling like all of this is worthless, I don't know what I'm doing, try to go back to what got you into art in the first place. The things that are exciting to you, the reasons that you create, that you feel drawn to create, and focus on those things. Again, this is often solved in some mediocre way by just doing the thing you want to do. If you want to write a book, just start writing it and figure it'll probably be terrible, and that's fine. Like, you get better at doing a thing by doing it poorly in most cases. But artistically, definitely this is the case, that you have to draw poorly before you draw well. You have to paint poorly before you paint well. That's just how it goes. And the faster you accept that idea, the better you'll be. The last category here is the artist that approaches art for the sake of joy alone. And these artists are in some ways the most stereotypical, and I think also kind of the most odd. I think in a lot of ways, this is the ideal form of artist, the one who dedicates themselves to art for its own sake, for the pursuit of novelty and joy. There is a childlike nature to this artist, in the best way possible. I yearn for more of this, having grown older and more curmudgeon-y as time's gone on, and I think this category perhaps has the most to teach us, regardless of where we are on the spectrum. In a lot of ways, this category probably contains the largest quantity of artists. Most people listening to this right now are likely in this category, perhaps with a touch of the other two thrown in as seasoning. Most people seem to work on art because it's fun, because it's explorative, and because they are simply drawn toward it with some intense magnetism. To avoid making is to deny something about themselves. The benefits of this particular kind of artist are bountiful and potentially rather obvious. There is the simple fact that when you pursue joy in your art above all else, you're going to have fun. It's going to be a more enjoyable and happy experience. And this is good. Life is hard. And when you can have something that you dedicate a little bit of time to every day or every week that simply makes your life better, that's hard to avoid as being a good thing in your life. The simple basis of this kind of art, one who pursues joy, is just a wonderful thing. I yearn for this because for me it's difficult. I do enjoy my art a lot of the time, but I always feel like there's this thing in the back of my mind that I'm working toward, and it requires that the art is difficult. There's a certain sense of longevity in the craft when this is how you approach it. It's easier to stay making things when you enjoy that process. And as art is such a long journey, it takes so long to really become proficient at the skills that you need to become proficient at. If you are able to give yourself an excuse to stay in it longer, you're going to improve better. You're going to have more artistic pieces that are completed by the time you're done making art when you're like 80 or 90 years old, or, whenever you stop, which is hopefully never, but I suppose at some point we're all going to stop living. So that'll be the point where we stop making art. There's a longevity to your craft, though, when it's something that you enjoy, when it's something that's easy to come back to. And that's part of this as well, is it's easy to jump back into your art when it's fun, when it's something that you enjoy, when it's relaxing, when it's a break from the rest of your life. It's easier to get back into it. Now, me being an artist who really pursues progress very much as my North Star, this kind of approach is really beneficial, because the more I can enjoy my art, the more I stay in it, and therefore the more I progress. So there's almost this weird aspect of I try to trick myself into like, no, we're not working right now. We're doing enjoyable things. We're enjoying our drawing, aren't we, Zach? This is really nice. We should just keep doing this. No, we don't need to take a break. Nope, you don't need to lay down and take a nap or look at Instagram. You can just keep drawing. This is good for you. It's fun, isn't it? And that kind of mindset can be really, really beneficial. Branching off of that, there is just a real boon in the fact that you will progress. You will grow more as an artist because you're frequently putting time into things. So for me, this kind of showed up in my robot series that I did earlier on in 2024 and the dragons that I did for Smogist. These were things that I really enjoyed working on, and it became less of a hassle, less of a chore. It felt less like work to keep coming back to them and drawing them. I did 100 robots and I did 30 or 31 dragons, and that's a lot of finished drawings. I have years when, specifically when I was teaching or even in college or when I was a professional landscaper as well, there were years where I might only complete 2 or 3 art pieces in an entire year. So to look at 2024 and go, I think I finished 4 or 6 paintings. I've done 150, 170 drawings that are like actually illustrations, some, greater and some lesser than others. But I'll have somewhere in the neighborhood of 170 to 180 completed pieces of artwork done this year. And that's tremendous. That might be the most I've ever completed in a year. And the difference too is these aren't just like random sketchbook pages that I covered. These are actual drawings. These are illustrations that are complete in and of themselves. And that's a wonderful feeling. I get a lot of joy and satisfaction out of the fact that they're done, that they exist, that if I, got injured now and could no longer make art, like those things would exist and they would exist forever. They're things that my daughter can look at when she gets a little older and starts really pursuing art on her own. If she continues to go down that path, there'll be things that exist, things that will always have existed. These people also are some of the most fun to work with. It's really enjoyable to sit down and work with an artist who is dedicated to joy and happiness. Go figure, huh? But the person who is dedicated to having fun with their art is often going to make you have more fun with your art as well. So if you are this kind of artist, it's easy for you to work alongside other people, and you bring joy and happiness into their life as well. And that camaraderie, that community is super important for us as artists, especially as you get older. Just like I mentioned earlier when I talked about the Discord server. When you get older, it's harder to have those little communities, and so it can be a really beneficial thing if you're the kind of artist who really pursues this out of joy. Well, what about some of the struggles then? Because even in this category, there are some potential hurdles and struggles that you might run into. Though I have rambled about the benefits of this category, it's not without its potential downfalls. In this manner, however, the downfalls are different. Less likely to be hurdles that everyone encounters and more likely to be potential roadblocks that might turn up. The first of which is simply a lack of direction. If you are dedicated to the pursuit of joy and you just draw for fun all the time, it is not particularly odd or rare to work for several months and then kind of just have this moment of like, what am I doing? The reality is that as an artist, you are probably going to be fluctuating in your mindset pretty frequently. There's some unique traits that we have, some of which are amazing and some of which drive us nuts. And one of those is that there is always a sense of creeping self-doubt or self-awareness in the back of most artists. Not all, obviously. But it is not uncommon for an artist who works just for joy to sit there and be like, wait, what am I doing? Like, I should have been dedicating this time to a different thing or should have really focused on this skill. And if you're aware of that and you take some time every once in a while and think about it, it can pretty easily be avoided. But it is a potential roadblock, a stumbling block that can pop up if you're not aware of it. You can also feel a sense of wasted potential. After years of working, if you find yourself tending toward one of the other categories, toward pursuing practice, project, or profession, the desire to head for a career or to progress substantially towards some other end, it is easy to feel as if you've been wasting your time. This is, of course, not actually true. Your time was invested in something that brought you joy in a noble pursuit in and of itself, but reality has never stopped the artist from being too hard on themselves. So just keep in mind that it is something that could creep up. You might run into a point where you feel like, goodness, I've wasted my time, I've wasted my potential because I've just focused on having fun. I could have been focusing on something this whole time. I've been just doing lots of fun little drawings and I could have had 6 books done by this time, and maybe, but that doesn't mean that what you've done so far is irrelevant or that it's pointless. So just keep in mind that this might be something you run into. Another is negative feedback from those around you or even from yourself. Unfortunately, people do not respect what they do not understand, and a large portion of the populace are not particularly artistic, and this comes into play in that realm. So, if you are just pursuing this for joy, it's not particularly uncommon for people around you to accuse you of wasting time, which is funny because how much of our entertainment time is nothing but wasting time and just trying to make life more bearable. Watching football games, watching Netflix shows, reading books, playing video games. All of these things are just a pursuit to, engage your mind and ignore reality for a little while. And if that's what art is for you, I would argue that it's better than the other categories because you're developing a skill and something is actually produced in the process. If you watch a whole season of Netflix shows, you get to the end and it's like you have the knowledge of what was in that show and you were occupied for whatever amount of time. But if you take that same amount of time and you just drew in your sketchbook, chances are you have half a sketchbook finished. A sketchbook finished with things that are all continual expressions of your personhood, and your skill is developing while you do that. There's so many benefits to it. So this is something that can crop up if you're not particularly dedicated to, writing a book or to producing a comic or illustrating something. It's easy for people around you to not really understand what you're doing, but that's fine. They don't need to understand what you're doing. Artists are hard for non-artists to understand, and we're never really going to get them to wrap their head around us. I think that for most of us, it's beneficial to just stop trying. Don't feel like it's your responsibility to explain your unique qualities as an artist to people who don't get it. Well, what do we do with this information? This has been a long ramble about 3 different categories of artists from a random internet man. And I do think that there is some logic to talking about this. I think there is a reason why it's beneficial to analyze yourself, to try to understand which kind of artist you are, to think about the people in your life and try to think about what kind of artist they are. The first thing off the bat here is that knowing yourself better helps you to move forward in whichever way you do desire. Without a clear understanding, it can be really easy to succumb to comparison, to looking at other artists and what they do and wonder if you should be doing the same. We all do this. It's all too easy to look at a professional artist's work and wonder why yours doesn't look like that, if your pursuits are really worth it, and if you might be better off abandoning your art in lieu of something more reasonable, like, gardening or getting another degree. However, if you know yourself, your desires artistically, it is much easier to fight off the voices in your head, the little nagging words that tell you what you can and can't amount to. It gives you the ability to interface better with other artists as well. As we all tend to come at things from very different perspectives, it can be good to have this information on hand. Part of the reason I wanted to talk about this in the first place has to do with the sheer quantity of videos on this very platform that talk about artistic things. I don't have to tell you, I am sure, but if you go look for art content on YouTube, a large quantity of it is focused on things that will get you an art career or give you the ability to make money with your art. I see far less that are simply about enjoying the process more, even though it is an advantageous attribute regardless. It is too easy to get swept along and to think to yourself, this is what an artist is supposed to do. Likewise, when you talk to others, you can better understand where they are coming from, so that your comments and critiques or even perhaps advice can be pointed in the right direction. I succumb to this some myself. It is oh so human to think that others approach things from your same perspective. I want to grow, to get better as an artist, and that leads me to do all manner of artistic things I do not enjoy. I have spent lots of time drawing and practicing things I do not enjoy in the pursuit of honing a skill that I desire. I used to track every minute, try to gauge my growth, figure out what exactly was needed. Oh, so many spreadsheets used for tracking all manner of incomprehensible and unnecessary things. If I take that same approach to the content I make here, if it influences my advice to younger artists without stopping to understand their perspective and their goals, I can give some pretty terrible advice. If your goal is to use art as therapy, as a fun and joy-filled pursuit, then me telling you to draw every day, to practice hard things, to treat it like a workout is missing the point for you. And if you take that advice, you will regret it, and perhaps even come to think of yourself as a failure. And what a colossal error that would be on my part. In the same train of thought, it gives you a better manner of conversing with non-artists, especially with family members. If you are pursuing a career, your crazy uncle who thinks art is stupid is going to pay more attention when you talk about expenses, hourly rates, and things that line up with their particular realm of thought. If you are able to tell your friends or parents that your pursuit of art is simply akin to their reading addiction or some other hobby they pursue, they will likely get off your back. And if you simply say, well, I don't watch professional sports, instead I make art, most people, especially those who don the attire of their favorite team and watch them dutifully, even if they do not understand why, will generally respect your decisions. All in all, there is an infinite amount to talk about when it comes to artists, to how different we all are from one another. The whole point here is simple, I think. Be careful about putting yourself in a box, about defining yourself based on another's standard. Understand who you are as an artist, what your desires are, what you are trying to pursue. Understand that whichever of these three categories, a merger of the three, or even one that I didn't touch on today, whatever category you fall into, there's nothing wrong with that. You are not faulty as an artist. You're not wasting your time. There's just a lot of different ways that you can approach this. But what do you think? I would love to hear from you in the comments below. As always, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you listening and being here. I love to read all the comments and see what your thoughts are on these manner of topics. As I mentioned earlier, we have a Discord, and if you would like to check it out, you can feel free to do so. In addition, I have a Patreon, and if you would like to check that out, there's also a link below. The Patreon gives access to some exclusive videos, some content early, the ability to vote on upcoming topics for podcasts and sketchbook sessions, and more things like that. So please feel free to check it out, and thank you to my patrons. Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.